Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to Story Time presented by Southwest Shakespeare. I am your host and your reader today. So welcome. We are reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. We are on chapter 17 for those of you who are just joining us. We're about halfway through. If you haven't watched the other videos, please, by all means, go catch up with everyone. And if you're here, like Miss James is here, welcome. She says, Happy Rebecca Day to all. I am both excited and anxious about what's going to happen next. Yes, I would firmly agree with you. And we should actually be able to get through a couple of chapters today. Chapter 16 was a doozy. It was an hour for one chapter. But at the end of it, if we remember, she came in looking like Caroline de Winter, and the whole room stopped and froze. And she went, Maxim told her to go back up and go change your clothes and put on whatever you can. Just don't wear that. And then when she turned, after she changed, Mrs. Danvers was standing there, and she looked like creepy and the cat that got the cream. And so we shall see what happens. I am alone today, so I have some dogs. So if you hear barking, we'll just pause and then keep moving forward. So welcome back, Catherine. I hope you are settled in with your knitting, and everyone else who is joining us, welcome. Let us get into Rebecca. Chapter 17. Clarice was waiting for me in my bedroom. She looked pale and scared. As soon as she saw me, she burst into tears. I did not say anything. I began tearing at the hooks of my dress, ripping the stuff. I could not manage them properly, and Clarice came to help me, still crying noisily. It's all right, Clarice. It's not your fault, I said, and she shook her head, the tears running down her cheeks. Your lovely dress, madam, she said. Your lovely white dress. It doesn't matter, I said. Can't you find the hook? There it is at the back, and another one somewhere, just below. She fumbled with the hooks, her hands trembling, making worse trouble with it than I did myself, and all the time catching at her breath. What will you wear instead, madam? She said. I don't know, I said. I don't know. She had managed to unfasten the hooks, and I struggled out of the dress. I think I'd rather like to be alone, Clarice, I said. Would you be a dear and leave me? Don't worry, I shall manage all right. Forget what's happened. I want you to enjoy the party. Can't I press out a dress for you, madam? She said, looking at me with swollen, streaming eyes. It won't take me a moment. No, I said, don't bother. I'd rather you went. And Clarice. Yes, madam? Don't say anything about what just happened. No, madam. She burst into another torrent of weeping. Don't let the others see you like that, I said. Go to your bedroom and do something to your face. There's nothing to cry about, nothing at all. Somebody knocked on the door. Clarice threw me a quick, frightened glance. Who is it? I said. The door opened and Beatrice came into the room. She came to me at once, a strange, rather ludicrous figure in her Eastern drapery, the bangles dangling on her wrists. My dear, she said, my dear, and held out her hands to me. Clarice slipped out of the room. I felt tired suddenly and unable to cope. I went and sat down on the bed. I put my hand up to my head and took off the curled wig. Beatrice stood watching me. Are you all right? She said. You look very white. It's the light, I said. It never gives anyone any color. Sit down for a few minutes and you'll be all right, she said. Wait, and I'll get you a glass of water. She went to the bathroom, her bangles jangling with her every moment, and then she came back, the glass of water in her hand. I drank some to please her, not wanting a bit. It tasted warm from the tap. She had not let it run. Of course, I knew at once it was just a terrible mistake, she said. You could not possibly have known. Why should you? Known what? I said. Why, the dress, you poor dear, the picture you copied of the girl in the gallery. It was what Rebecca did at the last fancy dress ball at Manderley. Identical. The same picture, the same dress. You stood there on the stairs, and for one ghastly moment I thought... She did not go on with her sentence. She patted me on the shoulder. You poor child, how wretchedly unfortunate. How were you to know? I ought to have known, I said stupidly, staring at her, too stunned to answer. I ought to have known. Nonsense! How could you know? It was not the sort of thing that could possibly enter any of our heads. Only it was such a shock, you see. None of us expected it. And Maxim— Yes, Maxim? I said. He thinks, you see, it was deliberate on your part. You had some bet that you could startle him, didn't you? Some foolish joke. And of course he doesn't understand. It was such a frightful shock for him. I told him at once you could not have done such a thing, and that it was sheer appalling luck that you had chosen that particular picture. I ought to have known, I repeated again. It's all my fault. I ought to have seen. I ought to have known. No. Don't worry. You'll be able to explain the whole thing to him quietly. Everything will be quite all right. The first lot of people were arriving just as I came upstairs to you. They are having drinks. Everything's all right. I've told Frank and Giles to make up a story about your dress not fitting, and you are very disappointed. I did not say anything. I went on sitting on the bed with my hands in my lap. What can you wear instead? Said Beatrice, going to my wardrobe and flinging open the doors. Here, what's this blue? Looks charming. Put this on. Nobody will mind. Quick, I'll help you. No, I said. No, I'm not coming down. Beatrice stared at me in great distress, my blue frock over her arm. But, my dear, you must, she said in dismay. You can't possibly not appear. No, Beatrice, I'm not coming down. I can't face them, not after what's happened. But nobody will know about the dress, she said. Frank and Giles will never breathe a word. We've got the story all arranged. The shop sent the wrong dress, and it did not fit, so you are wearing an ordinary evening dress instead. Everyone will think it's perfectly natural. It won't make any difference to the evening. You don't understand, I said. I don't care about the dress. It's not that at all. It's what happened, what I did. I can't come down now, Beatrice. I can't. But, my dear, Giles and Frank understand perfectly. They are full of sympathy. And Maxim, too. It was just the first shock. I'll try and get him alone a minute. I'll explain the whole thing. No, I said, no. She put my blue frock down beside me on the bed. Everyone will be arriving, she said, very worried, very upset. It will look so extraordinary if you don't come down. I can't say you've suddenly got a headache. Why not? I said wearily. What does it matter? Make anything up. Nobody will mind, and they won't any of them know me. Come now, my dear, she said, patting my hand. Try and make the effort. Put on this charming blue. Think of Maxim. You must come down for his sake. I am thinking about Maxim all the time, I said. Well, then, surely. No, I said, tearing at my nails, rocking backwards and forwards on the bed. I can't. Somebody else knocked on the door. Oh, dear, who on earth is that? Said Beatrice, walking to the door. What is it? She opened the door, and Giles was standing just outside. Everyone has turned up. Maxim sent me up to find what's happening, he said. She says she won't come down, said Beatrice. What on earth are we going to say? I caught sight of Giles peering at me through the open door. Oh, Lord, what a frightful mix-up, he whispered. He turned away, embarrassed, when he noticed that I had seen him. What shall I say to Maxim? He asked Beatrice. It's 8:05 now. Say she's feeling rather faint and will try and come down later. Tell them not to wait dinner. I'll be down directly. I'll make it all right. Yes, right you are. He half glanced in my direction again, sympathetic but rather curious, wondering why I sat there on the bed, and his voice was low, as it might have been after an accident when people are waiting for the doctor. Is there anything else I can do? He said. No, go down now, and I'll follow in a minute. He obeyed her, shuffling away in his Arabian robes. This is the sort of moment, I thought, that I shall laugh at years afterwards, that I shall say, do you remember how Giles was dressed as an Arab, and Beatrice had a veil over her face and jangling bangles on her wrist? And time will mellow it, make it a moment for laughter. But now it was not funny. Now I did not laugh. It was not the future, it was the present. It was too vivid and too real. I sat on the bed, plucking at the eiderdown, pulling a little feather out of a slit in one corner. Would you like some brandy? Said Beatrice, making a last effort. I know it's only Dutch courage, but it sometimes works wonders. No, I said, no, I don't want anything. I shall have to go down. Giles says they are waiting dinner. Are you sure it's all right for me to leave you? Yes, and thank you, Beatrice. Oh, my dear, don't thank me. I wish I could do something. She stooped swiftly at my looking-glass and dabbed her face with powder. God, what a sight I look, she said. This damned veil is crooked, I know. However, it can't be helped. She rustled out of the room, closing the door behind her. I felt I had forfeited her sympathy by my refusal to go down. I had shown the white feather. She had not understood. She belonged to another breed of men and women, another race than I. They had guts, the women of her race. They were not like me. If it had been Beatrice who had done this thing instead of me, she would have put on her other dress and gone down again to welcome her guests. She would have stood by Giles's side and shaken hands with people, a smile on her face. I could not do that. I had not the pride. I had not the guts. I was badly bred. I kept seeing Maxim's eyes blazing in his white face, and behind him Tim, Giles, and Beatrice and Frank standing like dummies staring at me. I got up from my bed and went and looked out the window. The gardeners were going round to the lights in the rose garden, testing them to see if they all worked. The sky was pale, with a few salmon clouds of evening streaks to the west. When it was dusk, the lamps would all be lit. There were tables and chairs in the rose garden for the couples who wanted to sit out. I could smell the roses from my window. Then men were talking to one another and laughing. There's one here gone, I heard the voice call out. Can you get me another small bub? Out of the blue ones, Bill. He fixed the light into position. He whistled a popular tune of the moment with easy confidence, and I thought how tonight perhaps the band would play the same tune in the minstrel's gallery above the hall. That's got it, said the man, switching the light on and off. They're all right here, no other gone. We'd better have a look at those on the terrace. They went off around the corner of the house, still whistling the song. I wished I could be the man. Later in the evening, he would stand with his friends in the drive and watch the cars drive up to the house, his hands in his pocket, his cap in the back of his head. He would stand in a crowd with the other people from the castle and then drink cider at the long table arranged for them in one corner of the terrace. Like the old days, isn't it? He would say. But his friend would shake his head, puffing at his pipe. This new one's not like our Mrs. De Winter. She's different altogether. And a woman next to them in the crowd would agree. Other people, too, all saying, That's right, and nodding their heads. Where is she tonight? She's not been at the terrace once. I can't say, I'm sure. I've not seen her. Mrs. De Winter used to be here, there, and everywhere. Aye, that's right. And the woman would turn to her neighbors, nodding mysteriously. They say she's not appearing tonight at all. Go on. 'Tis true. Ask Mary here. That's right. One of the servants from the house told me Mrs. De Winter hasn't come down from her room all evening. What's wrong with the maid? Is she bad? No, sulky, I reckon. They say her dress didn't please her. A squeal of laughter and a little murmur from the little crowd. Did you ever hear of such a thing? It's a shame for Mr. De Winter. I wouldn't stand for it, not from a chit like her. Maybe it's not true at all. Oh, it's true, all right. They're full of it up at the house. One to the other, this one to the next, a smile, a wink, a shrug of the shoulder, one group, and then another group, and then spreading to the guests who walked on the terrace and strolled across the lawn. The couple who in 3 hours' time would sit in those chairs beneath me in the rose garden. Do you suppose it's true what I heard? What did you hear? Why, that there's nothing wrong with her at all. They've had a colossal row, and she won't appear. I say, a lift of the eyebrows, a long whistle. I know. Well, it does look rather odd, don't you think? What I mean is, people don't suddenly, for no reason, have violent headaches. I call the whole thing a little jolly fishy. I thought he looked a bit grim. So did I. Of course, I have heard about the marriage is not a wild success. Really? Several people have said so. They say he's beginning to realize he's made a big mistake. She's nothing to look at, you know. No, I have heard there's nothing much to her. Who was she? Oh, no one at all. Some pick-up in the south of France, a nursery gov of something. Good Lord, I know. And when you think of Rebecca... I went on staring at the empty chairs. The salmon sky had turned to gray. Above my head was the evening star. In the woods beyond the rose garden, the birds were making their last little rustling noises before nightfall. A lone gull flew across the sky. I went away from the window, back to the bed again. I picked up the white dress I had left on the floor and put it back in the box with the tissue paper. I put the wig back in its box, too. Then I looked in one of my cupboards for the little portable ironer I used to have in Monte Carlo for Mrs. Van Hopper's dresses. It was lying at the back on a shelf with some woolen jumpers I had not worn for a long time. The iron was one of those universal kinds that could go into any voltage, and I fitted it to the plug in the wall. I began to iron the blue dress that Beatrice had taken from the wardrobe, slowly, methodically, as I used to iron Mrs. Van Hopper's dresses in Monte Carlo. When I had finished, I laid the dress ready on the bed. Then I cleaned the makeup off my face that I had put on for the fancy dress. I combed my hair and I washed my hands. I put on the blue dress and the shoes that went with it. I might have been my old self again, going down to the lounge of the hotel with Mrs. Van Hopper. I opened the door of my room and went along the corridor. Everything was still and silent. There might not have been a party at all. I tiptoed to the end of the passage and turned the corner. The door to the west wing was closed. There was no sound of anything at all. When I came to the archway by the gallery and the staircase, I heard the murmur and hum of conversation coming through the dining room. They were still having dinner. The great hall was deserted. There was nobody in the gallery either. The band must be having their dinner too. I did not know what arrangements had been made for them. Frank had done it. Frank or Mrs. Danvers. Yes, Catherine just said she's been criticized constantly for not being Rebecca and not doing things that Rebecca did. And now she accidentally pulls a Rebecca and everybody flips out. Yes. And I think we should now use pulls a Rebecca more often in our conversations. Poor Mrs. De Winters. From where I stood, I could see the picture of Caroline de Winter facing me in the gallery. I could see the curls framing her face, and I could see the smile on her lips. I remembered the bishop's wife who had said to me the day I called, "I shall never forget her, dressed all in white with that cloud of dark hair." I ought to have remembered that. I ought to have known. How queer the instruments looked in the gallery, the little stands of the music, the big drum. One of the men had left his handkerchief on a chair. I leant over the rail and looked down at the hall below. Soon it would be filled with people, like the bishop's wife had said, and Maxim would stand at the bottom of the stairs, shaking hands with them as they came into the hall. The sound of their voices were echoed to the ceiling, and then the band would play from the gallery where I was leaning now, the man with the violin smiling, swaying to the music. It would not be quiet like this anymore. A board creaked in the gallery. I swung around, looking at the gallery behind me. There was nobody there. The gallery was empty, just as it has been before. A current of air blew in my face, though. Somebody must have left a window open in one of the passages. The hum of voices continued in the dining room. I wondered why the board creaked when I had not moved at all. The warmth of the night, perhaps, a swelling somewhere in the old wood. The draft still blew in my face, though. A piece of music on one of the stands fluttered to the floor. I looked toward the archway above the stairs. The draft was coming from there. I went beneath the arch again, and when I came out to the long corridor, I saw that the door to the west wing had blown open and swung back against the wall. It was dark in the west passage. None of the lights had been turned on. I could feel the wind blowing on my face from an open window. I fumbled for a switch on the wall and could not find one. I could see the window in an angle at the passage, the curtain blowing softly backwards and forwards. The gray evening light cast queer shadows on the floor. The sound of the sea came to me through the open window, the soft hissing of the ebb tide leaving the shingle. I did not go and shut the window. I stood there shivering a moment in my thin dress, listening to the sea as it sighed and left the shore. Then I turned quickly and shut the door of the west wing behind me and came out again through the archway by the stairs. The murmur of voices had swollen now and was louder than before. The door of the dining room was open. They were coming out of dinner. I could see Robert standing by the open door, and there was a scraping of chairs, a babble of conversation, and a lot of laughter. I walked slowly down the stairs to meet them. When I look back at my first party at Manderley, my first and my last, I can remember little isolating things standing alone out of the vast blank canvas of the evening. The background is hazy, a sea of dim faces, none of whom I knew, and there was the slow drone of the band harping out a waltz that never finished, that went on and on. The same couples swung by in rotation with the same fixed smiles, and to me, standing with Maxim at the bottom of the stairs to welcome the latecomers, these dancing couples seemed like marionettes twisting and turning on a piece of string held by some invisible hand. There was a woman, I never knew her name, never saw her again, but she wore a salmon-colored gown hooped in crinoline form, a vague gesture to some past century, but whether 17th, 18th, or 19th I could not tell. And every time she passed me, it coincided with a sweeping bar of the waltz to which she dipped and swayed, smiling as she did so in my direction. It happened again and again until it became automatic, a matter of routine, like those promenades on board ships when we meet the same people bent on exercise like ourselves, and know with deadly certainty that we will pass them by the bridge. I can see her now, the prominent teeth, the gay spot of rouge placed high upon her cheekbones, and her smile, vacant, happy, enjoying her evening. Later I saw her by the supper table, her keen eyes searching the food, and she heaped a plate high with salmon and lobster mayonnaise and went off to a corner. There was Lady Crowan, too, monstrous in purple, disguised as I know not what romantic figure of the past. It might have been Marie Antoinette or Nell Gwynn, for all I knew. It was a strange, erotic combination of the two, and she kept exchanging in excited, high-pitched tones, or rather higher than usual because of the champagne she had consumed. "You all have to thank me for this, not the De Winters at all." I remember Robert dropping a tray of ices, and the expression on Frith's face when he saw Robert was the culprit and not one of the minions hired for the occasion. I wanted to go to Robert and stand behind him and say, "I know how you feel. I understand. I have done worse than you tonight." I can feel now the stiff, set smile on my face that did not match the misery in my eyes. I can see Beatrice, dear, friendly, tactless Beatrice, watching me from her partner's arms, nodding encouragement, the bangles jangling on her wrists, the veil slipping continually from her overheated forehead. I can picture myself once more whirled around the room in a desperate dance with Giles, who, with dog-like sympathy and kind, warm heart, would take no refusal, but must steer me through the stamping ground as he would one of his own horses at a meet. "It's a jolly pretty dress you're wearing," I can hear him say. "Makes all those people look damn silly." And I blessed him for his pathetic, simple gesture of understanding and sincerity, thinking, dear Giles, that I was disappointed in my dress, that I was worrying about my appearance, that I cared. It was Frank who brought me a plate of chicken and ham that I could not eat, and Frank who stood by my elbow with a glass of champagne I would not drink. "I wish you would," he said quietly. "I think you need it." And I took 3 sips of it to please him. The black patch over his eye gave him a pale, odd appearance, and it made him look older, different. There seemed to be lines in his face I had not seen before. He moved around the other guests like another host's, seeing to their comfort that they were supplied with food and drink and cigarettes, and he danced, too, in solemn, painstaking fashion, walking his partners around the room with a set face. He did not wear his pirate costume with abandon, and there was something rather tragic about the side whiskers he had fluffed under the scarlet handkerchief on his head. I thought of him standing before the looking-glass in his bare bachelor bedroom, curling them round his finger. Poor Frank. Dear Frank. I never asked. I never knew how much he hated the last fancy dress ball ever given at Manderley. The band played on, and the swaying couples twisted like bobbing marionettes to and fro, across the hall and back again, and it was not I who watched them at all, not someone with feelings, made of flesh and blood, but a dummy stick of a person in my stead, a prop who wore a smile screwed to its face. The figure who stood beside it was wooden too. His face was a mask, his smile not his own. The eyes were not the eyes of the man I loved, the man I knew. They looked through me, beyond me, cold, expressionless, to some place of pain and torture I could not enter, to some private inward hell I could not share. He never spoke to me, never touched me. We stood beside one another, the host and the hostess, and we were not together. I watched his courtesy to his guests. He flung a word to one, a jest to another, a smile to a third, a call over his shoulder to a fourth, and no one but myself would know that every utterance he made, every movement, was automatic and the work of a machine. We were like two performers in a play, but we were divided. We were not acting with one another. We had to endure it alone. We had to put up this show, this miserable sham performance for the sake of all these people I did not know and did not want to ever see again. I hear your wife's frock never turned up in time, said someone with a mottled face and a sailor's pigtail, and he laughed and dug Maxim in the ribs. Damn shame, what? I could sue the shop for fraud. Same thing happened to my wife's cousin once. Yes, it was unfortunate, said Maxim. I tell you what, said the sailor, turning to me. You ought to say, you are a forget-me-not. There's blue, aren't they? Jolly little flowers, forget-me-nots. Well, that's right, isn't it, De Winter? Tell your wife she must call herself a forget-me-not. He swept away, roaring with laughter, his partner in his arms. Pretty good idea, what? A forget-me-not. Then Frank again, hovering just beside me, another glass in his hand, lemonade this time. No, Frank, I am not thirsty. Why don't you dance? Or come and sit down a moment. There's a corner in the terrace. No, I'm better standing. I don't want to sit down. Can't I get you something? A sandwich? A peach? No, I don't want anything. There was the salmon lady again. She forgot to smile at me this time. She was flushed after her supper. She kept looking up to her partner's face. He was very tall, very thin. He had a chin like a fiddle. The Destiny Waltz, the Blue Danube, the Merry Widow, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, round and round. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, round and round. The salmon lady, a green lady, Beatrice again, her veil pushed back over her forehead, Giles, his face streaming with perspiration, and that sailor once more with another partner. They stopped beside me. I did not know her. She was dressed as a Tudor woman, any Tudor woman. She wore a ruffle around her throat and a black velvet dress. When are you coming to see us? She said, as though we were old friends. And I answered, soon, of course. We were talking about it the other day. Wondering why I felt it so easy to lie suddenly. No effort at all. Such a delightful party. I do congratulate you, she said. And thank you very much, I said. It's fun, isn't it? I hear they sent you the wrong dress. Yes, absurd, wasn't it? Those shops are all the same. No depending on them. But you look delightfully fresh in that pretty blue. Much more comfortable than this hot velvet. Don't forget, you both must come and dine at the palace soon. We should love to. What did she mean? Where? What palace? Were we entertaining royalty? She swept on to the Blue Danube in the arms of the sailor, her velvet frock brushing up the ground like a carpet sweeper, and it was not until long afterwards, in the middle of some night when I could not sleep, that I remembered the Tudor woman was the bishop's wife who liked to walk in the peons. What was the time? I did not know. The evening dragged on hour after hour, the same faces, the same tunes. Now and again, the bridge people crept out of the library like hermits to watch the dancers and then returned again. Beatrice, her draperies trailing behind her, whispered in my ear, Why don't you sit down? You look like death. I'm all right. Giles, the makeup running on his face, poor fellow, and stifling in his air a blanket, came to me and said, Come and watch the fireworks on the terrace. I remember standing on the terrace and staring up at the sky as the foolish rockets burst and fell. There was a little Clarice in a corner with some boy of the estate. She was smiling happily, squealing with delight as the squib sputtered at her feet. She had forgotten her tears. Hello, this'll be a big un, Giles, his face upturned, his mouth open. Here she comes. Bravo! Jolly fine show. The slow hiss of the rocket as it sped to the air, the burst of the explosion, the stream of little emerald stars, a murmur of approval from the crowd, cries of delight and applause. The salmon lady well to the front, her face eager with expectation, a remark for every star that fell. Ooh, what a beauty! Look at that one now. I say, how pretty. Oh, that one didn't burst. Take care, it's coming our way. What are those men doing over there? Even the hermits left their lair and came to join the dancers on the terrace. The lawns were black with people. The bursting stars shone in their upturned faces. Again and again the rockets sped into the air like arrows, and the sky became crimson and gold. Manderley stood out like an enchanted house, every window aflame, the gray walls colored by the falling stars. A house bewitched, carved out of the dark woods. And when the last rocket burst and the cheering died away, the night that had been fine before seemed dull and heavy in contrast. The sky became a pall. The little groups on the lawns and in the drive broke up and scattered. The guests crowded the long windows on the terrace back to the drawing room again. It was anticlimax. The aftermath had come. We stood about with blank faces. Someone gave me a glass of champagne, and I heard the sounds of cars starting up the drive. They're beginning to go. I thought, thank God they're beginning to go. The salmon lady was having some more supper. It would take time yet to clear the hall. I saw Frank make a signal to the band. I stood on the doorway between the drawing room and the hall beside a man I did not know. What a wonderful party it's been, he said. Yes, I said. I've enjoyed every minute of it, he said. I'm so glad, I said. Molly was wild at fury at missing it, he said. Was she? I said. The band began to play Auld Lang Syne. The man seized my hand and started swinging it up and down. Here, he said. Come on, some of you. Somebody else swung my other hand, and more people joined us. We stood in a great circle, singing at the top of our voices. The man who had joined this evening and said Molly would be wild at missing it was dressed as a Chinese mandarin, and his false nails got caught up in his sleeve as we swung our hands up and down. He roared with laughter. We all laughed. Should old acquaintance be forgot, we sang. The hilarious gaiety changed swiftly at the closing bars, and the drummer rattled his sticks at the inevitable prelude to God Save the King. The smiles left our faces as though wiped clean of a sponge. I remembered one vague... The mandarin sprung to attention, his hand stiff at his side. I remember wondering vaguely if he was in the army. How queer he looked, with his long poker face and his drooping mandarin mustache. I caught the salmon lady's eye. God Save the King had taken her unawares. She was still holding a plate heaped with chicken on aspis. She held it stiffly out in front of her like a church collection. All animation had gone away from her face. As the last note of God Save the King died away, she relaxed again and attacked her chicken in a sort of frenzy, chattering over her shoulder to her partner. Somebody came and wrung me by the hand. Don't forget, you're dining with us on the 14th of next month. Oh, are we? I stared blankly. Yes, we've got your sister-in-law to promise to. Oh, what fun. 8:30, black tie. So looking forward to meeting you. Yes, rather. People began to form up in queues to say goodbye. Maxim was on the other side of the room. I put my smile on again, which had worn thin after Auld Lang Syne. The best evening I've spent for a long time. I'm so glad. Many thanks for a grand party. I'm so glad. Here we are, you see, standing to the bitter end. Yes, I'm so glad. Was there no other sentence in the English language? I bowed and smiled like a dummy, my eyes searching for Maxim above their heads. He was caught up in a knot of people by the library. Beatrice, too, was surrounded, and Giles had led a team of stragglers to the buffet table in the drawing room. Frank was out in the drive, seeing that people got to their cars. I was hemmed in by strangers. Goodbye, and thanks tremendously. I'm so glad. The great hall began to empty. Already it wore that drab, deserted air of a vanished evening and the dawn of a tired day. There was a gray light on the terrace. I could see the shapes of the brown fireworks taking forms on the lawns. Goodbye, a wonderful party. I'm so glad. Maxim had gone out to join Frank on the drive. Beatrice came up to me, pulling off her jangling bracelets. I can't stand these things a moment longer. Heavens, I am dead beat. I don't believe I missed a dance. Anyway, it was a tremendous success. Was it? I said. My dear, hadn't you better off to bed? You look worn out. You've been standing nearly all the evening. Where are the men? Out on the drive. I shall have some coffee and eggs and bacon. What about you? No, Beatrice, I don't think I will. You look very charming in your blue. Everybody said so. And nobody had an inkling about the other thing, so you mustn't worry. No. If I were you, I should keep a long, good lie-in tomorrow morning. Don't attempt to get up. Have your breakfast in bed. Yes, perhaps. I'll tell Maxim you've gone up, shall I? Please, Beatrice. All right, my dear. Sleep well. She kissed me swiftly, patted my shoulders at the same time, and then went off to find Giles in the supper room. I walked slowly up the stairs, one step at a time. The band had turned the lights off in the galley and had gone down to have eggs and bacon too. Pieces of music lay about the floor. One chair had been upturned. There was an ashtray full of the stubs of their cigarettes. The aftermath of the party. I went along the corridor to my room. It was getting lighter every moment, and the birds had started singing. I did not have to turn on the lights to undress. A little chill wind blew in from the open window. It was rather cold. Many people must have used the rose garden during the evening, for all the chairs were moved and dragged from their places. There was a tray of empty glasses on one of the tables. Somebody had left a bag behind on a chair. I pulled the curtains to darken the room, but the gray morning light found its way through the gaps at the side. I got into bed, my legs very weary, a niggling pain in the small of my back. I lay back and closed my eyes, thankful for the cool white comfort of clean sheets. I wished my mind would rest like my body, relax and pass to sleep, not hum around in the way it did, jigging to music, whirling in a sea of faces. I pressed my hands over my eyes, but they would not go. I wondered how long Maxim would be. The bed beside me looked stark and cold. Soon there would be no shadows in the room at all. The walls and the ceilings and the floor would be white with the morning. The birds would sing their songs, louder, gayer, less subdued. The sun would make a yellow pattern on the curtain. My little bedside clock ticked out the minutes, one by one. The hand moved around the dial. I lay on my side watching it. It came to the hour and passed it again. It started afresh on its journey, but Maxim did not come. Chapter 18. I have to say, though, if I was not Mrs. De Winter, I probably would really like this party. I think I fell asleep a little after 7. It was broad daylight, I remember. There was no longer any pretense that the drawn curtains hid the sun. The light streamed in at the open window and made patterns on the wall. I heard the men below in the rose garden clearing away the tables and the chairs and taking down the chain of fairy lights. Maxim's bed was still bare and empty. I lay across my bed, my arms over my eyes, a strange, mad position and the least likely to bring sleep, but I drifted to the borderline of the unconscious and slipped over it at last. When I woke, it was past 11, and Clarice must have come in and brought me my tea without my hearing her, for there was a tray by my side, and a stone-cold teapot, and my clothes had been tidied, my blue frock put away in the wardrobe. I drank my cold tea, still blurred and stupid from my short, heavy sleep, and stared at the blank wall in front of me. Maxim's empty bed brought me to a realization with a queer shock to my heart, and the full anguish of the night before was upon me once again. He had not come to bed at all. His pajamas lay folded on the downturned sheets, untouched. I wondered what Clarice had thought when she came to the room with my tea. Had she noticed? Would she have gone out and told the other servants would they all discuss it over their breakfast? I wondered why I minded that, and why the thought of the servants talking about it in the kitchen should cause me such distress. It must be that I had a mean mind, a conventional, petty hatred of gossip. That was why I had come down last night in my blue dress and had not stayed hidden in my room. There was nothing brave or fine about it. It was a wretched tribute to convention. I had not come down for Maxim's sake, for Beatrice's sake, for the sake of Manderley. I had come down because I did not want people at the ball to think I had quarreled with Maxim. I did not want them to go home and say, "Of course you know they don't get on. I hear he's not at all happy." I had come down for my own sake, my own personal pride. As I sipped my cold tea, I thought with a tired, bitter feeling of despair that I would be content to live in one corner of Manderley and Maxim on the other as long as the outside world should never know. If he had no more tenderness for me, never kissed me again, did not speak to me except on matters of necessity, I believed I could bear it if I were certain that nobody knew of this but our two selves. If we could bribe servants not to tell, play our parts before relations, before Beatrice, and then, when we were alone, sit apart in our separate rooms, leading our separate lives. It seemed to me, as I sat there in bed, staring at the wall, the sunlight coming in at the window, and Maxim's empty bed, that there was nothing quite so shaming, so degrading as a marriage that had failed. Failed after 3 months, and mine has done. For I had no illusions left now. I no longer made any effort to pretend. Last night had shown me too well. My marriage was a failure. All the things that people would say about it if they knew were true. We did not get on. We were not companions. We were not suited to one another. I was too young for Maxim, too inexperienced, and more important still, I was not of his world. The fact that I loved him in a sick, hurt, desperate way like a child or a dog did not matter. It was not the sort of love he needed. He wanted something else that I could not give him, something he had had before. I thought of the youthful, almost hysterical excitement and conceit with which I had gone into this marriage, imagining I could bring happiness to Maxim, who had known much greater happiness before. Even Mrs. Van Hopper, with her cheap views and common outlook, had known I was making a mistake. "I'm afraid you will regret it," she said. "I believe you are making a big mistake." But I would not listen to her. I thought her hard and cruel. But she was right. She was right about everything. The last mean trust thrown at me before she said goodbye. "You don't flatter yourself he's in love with you, do you? He's lonely. He can't bear that great empty house," was the sanest, most truthful statement she had ever made in her life. Maxim was not in love with me. He had never loved me. Our honeymoon in Italy had meant nothing at all to him, nor our living here together. What I had thought I was in love with him, for myself as a person, was not love. It was just that he was a man, and I was his wife, and was young, and he was lonely. He did not belong to me at all. He belonged to Rebecca. He still thought about Rebecca. He would never love me because of Rebecca. She was in the house still, as Mrs. Danvers had said. She was in that room in the west wing. She was in the library, in the morning room, in the gallery above the hall, even in the little flower room where her mackintosh still hung, and in the garden, and in the woods, and down in the stone cottage on the beach. Her footsteps sounded in the corridors. Her scent lingered on the stairs. The servants obeyed her orders still. The food we ate was the food she liked. Her favorite flowers filled the rooms. Her clothes were in the wardrobes in her room. Her brushes were on the table. Her shoes beneath the chair. Her nightdress on her bed. Rebecca was still mistress of Manderley. Rebecca was still Mrs. De Winter. I had no business here at all. I had come blundering like a poor fool on ground that was preserved. "Where is Rebecca?" Maxim's grandmother had cried. "I want Rebecca. What have you done with Rebecca?" She did not know me. She did not care about me, and why should she? I was a stranger to her. I did not belong to Maxim or to Manderley. And Beatrice, at our first meeting, looking me up and down, frank, direct. "You're very different from Rebecca." Frank, reserved, embarrassed when I spoke of her, hating the questions I had poured upon him, even as I had hated them myself, and then answering that one final one as we came towards the house, his voice grave and quiet. Yes, she was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. Rebecca, always Rebecca. Wherever I walked in Manderley, wherever I sat, even in my thoughts and in my dreams, I met Rebecca. I knew her figure now, the long, slim legs, the small, narrow feet, her shoulders broader than mine, the capable, clever hands, hands that could steer a boat, could hold a horse, hands that arranged flowers, made the models of ships, and wrote "Max from Rebecca" on the flyleaf of a book. I knew her face, too, small and oval, the clear white skin, the cloud of dark hair. I knew the scent she wore. I could guess her laughter and her smile. If I heard it, even after 1,000 others, I would recognize her voice. Rebecca. Always Rebecca. I should never be rid of Rebecca. Perhaps I haunted her as she haunted me. She looked down on me from the galleries, as Mrs. Danvers had said. She sat beside me when I wrote my letters at her desk. That mackintosh I wore, the handkerchief I used, they were hers. Perhaps she knew and had seen me take them. Jasper had been her dog, and he ran at my heels now. The roses were hers, and I cut them. Did she resent me and fear me as I resented her? Did she want Maxim alone in the house again? I could fight the living, but I could not fight the dead. If there was some woman in London that Maxim loved, someone he wrote to, visited, dined with, slept with, I could fight with her. We would stand on common ground. I should not be afraid. Anger and jealousy were things that could be conquered. One day the woman would grow old or tired or different, and Maxim would not love her anymore. But Rebecca would never grow old. Rebecca would always be the same, and she and I could not fight. She was too strong for me. I got out of bed and pulled the curtains. The sun streamed into the room. The men had cleared the mess away from the rose garden. I wonder if people were talking about the ball the way they did after a party. Do you think it was quite up to their usual standard? Oh, I think so. The band dragged a bit, I thought. The supper was damn good. Fireworks weren't bad. B. Lacey was beginning to look old. Who wouldn't in that get-up? I thought he looked rather ill. He always does. What'd you think of the bride? Not much, rather dull. I wonder if it's a success. Yes, I wonder. Then I noticed for the first time there was a note under my door. I went and picked it up. I recognized the square hand of Beatrice. She had scribbled it in pencil after breakfast. I knocked at your door but had no answer, so gather you've taken my advice and are sleeping off last night. Giles is anxious to get back early as they have rung up from home to say he's wanted to take somebody's place in a cricket match, and it starts at 2. How he's going to see the ball after all the champagne he put away last night, heaven only knows. I'm feeling a bit weak in the legs, but slept like a top. Fritz says Maxim was down early to breakfast, and there's no sign of him now. So please give him our love, and many thanks to both of you for our evening, which we thoroughly enjoyed. Don't think any more about the dress. This last bit was heavily underlined. Yours affectionately, B, said a postscript. You must both come and see us soon. She had scribbled 9:30 a.m. at the top of the paper, and it was now nearly 11:30. They had been gone about 2 hours. They would be home by now. Beatrice with her suitcase unpacked, going out into her garden and taking up her usual routine, and Giles preparing for his match, renewing the whipping on his bat. In the afternoon, Beatrice would change into a cool frock and a shady hat and watch Giles play cricket. They would have tea afterwards in a tent, Giles very hot and red in the face, Beatrice laughing and talking to her friends. Yes, we went over to the dance at Manderley. It was great fun. I wonder Giles was able to run a yard. Smiling at Giles, patting him on the back. They were both middle-aged and unromantic. They'd been married for 20 years and had a grown-up son who was going to Oxford. They were very happy. Their marriage was a success. It had not failed after 3 months, and mine had done. I could not go on sitting in my bedroom any longer. The maids would want to come and do the room. Perhaps Clarice would not have noticed about Maxim's bed after all. I rumpled it to make it look as though he had slept there. I did not want the housemaids to know if Clarice had not told them. I had a bath and dressed and went downstairs. The men had taken up the floor already in the hall, and the flowers had been carried away. The music stands were gone from the gallery. The band must have caught an early train. The gardeners were sweeping the lawns and the drive clear of the spent fireworks. Soon there would be no trace left of the fancy-dress ball at Manderley. How long the preparations had seemed, and how short and swift the clearance now. I remembered the salmon lady standing by the drawing-room door with her plate of chicken, and it seemed to me a thing must have fancied as something that had happened very long ago. Robert was polishing the table in the dining room. He was normal again, stolid, dull, not the fey, excited creature of the past few weeks. Good morning, Robert, I said. Good morning, madam. Have you seen Mr. De Winter anywhere? He went out soon after breakfast, madam, before Major and Mrs. Lacey were down. He has not been back since. You don't know where he went? No, madam, I could not say. I wandered back again into the hall. I went through the drawing room to the morning room. Jasper rushed at me and licked my hands in a frenzy of delight, as if I had been away for a long time. He had spent the evening on Clarice's bed, and I had not seen him since tea time yesterday. Perhaps the hours had been as long for him as they had for me. I picked up the telephone and asked for the number of the estate office. Perhaps Maxim was with Frank. I felt I must speak to him, even if it was only for 2 minutes. I must explain to him that I had not meant to do what I had done last night. Even if I never spoke to him again, I must tell him that. The clerk answered the telephone and told me that Maxim was not there. Mr. Crawley is here, Mrs. De Winter, said the clerk. Would you speak to him? I would have refused, but he gave me no chance, and before I could put down the receiver, I heard Frank's voice. Is anything the matter? It was a funny way to begin a conversation. The thought flashed through my mind. He did not say good morning, or did you sleep well? Why did he ask if something was the matter? Frank, it's me. Where's Maxim? I don't know. I haven't seen him. He's not been in this morning. Not been into the office? No. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Did you see him at breakfast? Said Frank. No, I did not get up. How did you sleep? How did he sleep? I hesitated. Frank was the only person I did not mind knowing. He did not come to bed last night. There was silence at the other end of the line, as though Frank was thinking hard for an answer. "Oh," he said at last, very slowly. "Oh, I see." And then, after a minute, "I was afraid something like that would happen. Frank, what did he say last night when everyone had gone? Where did you all go? What did you all do?" "I had a sandwich with Giles and Mrs. Lacey," said Frank. "Maxim did not come. He made some excuse and went into the library. I came back home almost at once. Perhaps Mrs. Lacey can tell you." "She's gone," I said. "They went after breakfast. She sent up a note, and she had not seen Maxim, she said." "Oh." I did not like it. I did not like the way he said it. It was sharp and ominous. "Where do you think he's gone?" I said. "I don't know," said Frank. "Perhaps he's gone for a walk." It was the sort of voice doctors use to relatives in a nursing home when they have come to inquire. "Frank, I must see him. I've got to explain about last night." Frank did not answer, and I could picture his anxious face, the lines on his forehead. "Maxim thinks I did it on purpose," I said, my voice breaking in spite of myself, and the tears that had blinded me last night and I had not shed came coursing down my cheeks 16 hours too late. "Maxim thinks I did it as a joke, a beastly, damnable joke." "No," said Frank, "no. He does, I tell you. You didn't see his eyes as I did. You didn't stand beside him all the evening, watching him as I did. He didn't speak to me, Frank. He never looked at me again. We stood there together the whole evening, and he never spoke to one another." "There was no chance," said Frank. "All those people." "Of course I saw. Don't you think I know Maxim well enough for that?" "Look here." "I don't blame him," I interrupted. "If he believes that I played a vile, hideous joke, he was right to think what he likes of me and never talk to me again, never see me again." "You mustn't talk like that," said Frank. "You don't know what you're saying. Let me come up and see you. I think I can explain." What was the use of Frank coming up to see me and us sitting in the morning room together, Frank smoothing me down, Frank being tactful, Frank being too kind? I did not want kindness for anyone right now. It was too late. "No," I said. "No, I don't want to go over it and over it again. It's happened. It can't be altered now. Perhaps it's a good thing. It's made me realize something I ought to have known before, that I ought to have expected when I married Maxim." "What do you mean?" said Frank. His voice was sharp and queer. I wonder why it should matter to him about Maxim not loving me. Why did he not want me to know? "About him and Rebecca," I said. And as I said her name, it sounded strange and sour, like a forbidden word, a relief to me no longer, not a pleasure, but hot and shaming as a sin confessed. Frank did not answer for a moment. I heard him drawing his breath at the other end of the wire. "What do you mean?" he said again, shorter and sharper than before. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't love me. He loves Rebecca," I said. "He's never forgotten her. He thinks about her still, night and day. He's never loved me, Frank. It's always Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca." I heard Frank give a startled cry, but I did not care how much I shocked him now. "Now you know how I feel," I said. "Now you understand." "Look here," he said. "I've got to come and see you. I've got to. Do you hear? It's vitally important. I can't talk you down on the telephone. Mrs. De Winter! Mrs. De Winter!" I slammed down the receiver and got up from the writing desk. I did not want to see Frank. He could not help me over this. No one could help me but myself. My face was red and blotchy from crying. I walked about the room, biting the corner of my handkerchief, tearing at the edge. The feeling was strong within me that I should never see Maxim again. It was certainty, born of some strange instinct. He had gone away and would not come back. I knew in my heart that Frank believed this too and would not admit it to me on the telephone. He did not want to frighten me. If I rang him up at the office now, I would find that he had gone. The clerk would say, "Mr. Crawley has gone out, Mrs. De Winter," and I would see Frank, hatless, climbing his small, shabby Morris, driving off in search of Maxim. I went and stared out of the window of the little clearing where the satyr playing his pipes. The rhododendrons were all over now. They would not bloom again for another year. The tall shrubs looked dark and drab now that the color had gone. A fog was rolling up from the sea, and I could not see the woods beyond the bank. It was very hot, very oppressive. I could imagine our guests of last night saying to one another, "What a good thing this fog kept off for yesterday. We should never have seen the fireworks." I went out of the morning room and through the drawing room to the terrace. The sun had gone in behind a wall of mist. It was as though a blight had fallen upon Manderley, taking the sky away and the light of the day. One of the gardeners passed me with a barrow full of bits of paper and litter and skins of fruit left on the lawns by the people last night. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning, madam. I'm afraid the ball last night has made a lot of work for you." "That's all right, madam," he said. "I think everybody enjoyed themselves good and hearty, and that's the main thing, isn't it?" "Yes, I suppose so," I said. He looked across the lawns to the clearing in the woods where the valley sloped to the sea. The dark trees loomed thin and indistinct. "It's coming up very thick," he said. "Yes," I said. "A good thing it wasn't like this last night," he said. "Yes," I said. He waited a moment, and then he touched his cap and went off trundling his barrow. I went across the lawns to the edge of the woods. The mist in the trees had turned to moisture and dripped upon my bare head like a thin rain. Jasper stood by my feet, dejected, his tail downcast, his pink tongue hanging from his mouth. The clammy oppression of the day had made him listless and heavy. I could hear the sea from where I stood, sullen and slow, as it broke on the coves below the woods. The white fog rolled on past me towards the house, smelling of damp salt and seaweed. I put my hand on Jasper's coat. It was wringing wet. When I looked back at the house, I could not see the chimneys or the contour of the walls. I could only see the vague substance of the house, the windows in the west wing and the flower tubs on the terrace. The shutter had been pulled aside from the window of the large bedroom on the west wing, and someone was standing there, looking down upon the lawns. The figure was shadowy and indistinct, and for one moment of shock and fear, I believed it to be Maxim. Then the figure moved, and I saw the arm reach up to fold the shutter, and I knew it was Mrs. Danvers. She had been watching me then, as I stood at the edge of the woods, bathed in that white wall of fog. She had seen me walk slowly from the terrace to the lawns. She may have listened to my conversation with Frank on the telephone from the connecting line in her own room. She would know that Maxim had been with me last night. She would have heard my voice, known about my tears. She knew the part I played through the long hours, standing by Maxim's side in my blue dress at the bottom of the stairs, and that he had not looked at me nor spoken to me. She knew because she meant it to happen. This was her triumph, hers and Rebecca's. I thought of her as I had seen her last night, watching me through the open door of the west wing, and that diabolical smile on her white skull face, and I remembered that she was a living, breathing woman like myself. She was made of flesh and blood. She was not dead, like Rebecca, and I could speak to her, but I could not speak to Rebecca. I walked back across the lawns on sudden impulse to the house. I went through the hall and up the great stairs. I turned in under the archway by the gallery. I passed through the door to the west wing and so along the dark, silent corridor to Rebecca's room. I turned the handle of the door and went inside. Mrs. Danvers was still standing by the window, and the shutter was folded back. "Mrs. Danvers," I said. "Mrs. Danvers." She turned to look at me, and I saw her eyes were red and swollen with crying, even as my were, and there were dark shadows in her white face. "What is it?" she said, and her voice was thick and muffled from the tears she had shed, even as mine had been. I had not expected to find her so. I had pictured her smiling as she had smiled last night, cruel and evil. Now she was none of those things. She was an old woman who was ill and tired. I hesitated, my hand still on the knob of the open door, and I did not know what to say to her now or what to do. She went on staring at me with those red, swollen eyes, and I could not answer her. "I left the menu on the desk as usual," she said. "Do you want something changed?" Her words gave me courage, and I left the door and came to the middle of the room. "Mrs. Danvers," I said, "I have not come to talk about the menu. You know that, don't you?" She did not answer me. Her left hand opened and shut. "You've done what you wanted, haven't you?" I said. "You meant this to happen, didn't you? Are you pleased now? Are you happy?" She turned her head away and looked out the windows as she had done when I first came in the room. "Why did you ever come here?" she said. "Nobody wanted you at Manderley. We were all right until you came. Why did you not stay where you were out in France?" "You seem to forget I love Mr. De Winter," I said. "If you loved him, you would never have married him," she said. I did not know what to say. The situation was mad, unreal. She kept talking in that choked, muffled way with her head turned from me. I thought I hated you, but I don't know, she said. It seems to have spent itself, all the feeling I had. Why should you hate me? I asked. What have I ever done to you that you should hate me? You tried to take Mrs. De Winter's place, she said. Still, she would not look at me. She stood there sullen, her head turned from me. I had nothing changed, I said. Manderley went on as it had always been. I gave no orders. I left everything to you. I would have been friends with you if you had let me, but you set yourself against me from the first. I saw it in your face the moment I shook hands with you. She did not answer, and her hand kept opening and shutting against her dress. Many people marry twice, men and women, I said. There are thousands of second marriages taking place every day. You talk as though my marrying Mr. De Winter was a crime, a sacrilege against the death. Haven't we as much right to be happy as anyone else? Mr. De Winter is not happy, she said, turning to look at me at last. Any fool can see that. You have only to look into his eyes. He's still in hell, and he's looked like that ever since she died. It's not true, I said. It's not true. He was happy when we were in France together. He was younger, much younger, and laughing and gay. Well, he's a man, isn't he? She said. No man denies himself on a honeymoon, does he? Mr. De Winter's not 46 yet. She laughed contemptuously and shrugged her shoulders. How dare you speak like that? How dare you? I said. I was not afraid of her anymore. I went up to her and shook her by the arm. You made me wear that dress last night, I said. I should have never thought of it but for you. You did it because you wanted to hurt Mr. De Winter. You wanted to make him suffer. Hasn't he suffered enough without your playing that vile, hideous joke upon him? Don't you think his agony and pain will bring Mrs. De Winter's back? She shook herself clear of me. An angry color flooded her dead white face. What do I care for his suffering? She said. He's never cared for mine. How do you think I've liked it, watching you sit in her place, walk in her footsteps, touch the things that were hers? What do you think it's meant to me all these months, knowing that you wrote at her desk in the morning room, using the very pen that she used, speaking down the house telephone where she used to speak every morning of her life to me, ever since she came first to Manderley? What do you think it meant to me to hear Frith and Robert and the rest of the servants talking about you as Mrs. De Winter? Mrs. De Winter has gone out for a walk. Mrs. De Winter wants the car this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Mrs. De Winter won't be in tea until 5. And all the while, my Mrs. De Winter, my lady with her smile and her lovely face and brave ways, the real Mrs. De Winter, lying dead and cold and forgotten in the church script. If he suffers, then he deserves to suffer, marrying a young girl like you not 10 months afterwards. Well, he's paying for it now, isn't he? I've seen his face. I've seen his eyes. He's made his own hell, and there's no one but himself to thank for it. He knows she sees him. He knows she comes by night and watches him. And she doesn't come kindly. Not she, not my lady. She was never one to stand mute and still and be wronged. I'll see them in hell, Danny, she'd say. I'll see them in hell first. That's right, my dear, I'd tell her. No one will put upon you. You were born into the world to make and take what you could out of it. And she did. She didn't care. She wasn't afraid. She had all the courage and the spirit of a boy, had my Mrs. De Winter. She ought to have been a boy. I often told her that. I had the care of her as a child. You knew that, didn't you? No, I said. No, Mrs. Danvers. What's the use of all of this? I don't want to hear anymore. I don't want to know. Haven't I got feelings as well as you? Can't you understand what it means to me to hear her mentioned? To stand here and listen while you tell me about her? She did not hear me, and she went on raving like a madwoman, a fanatic, her long fingers twisting and tearing the black stuff of her dress. She was lovely then, she said. Lovely as a picture. Men turning to stare at her when she passed, she not 12 years old. She knew then. She used to wink at me like the little devil she was. I'm going to be a beauty, aren't I, Danny? She said, and we'll see about that, my love. We'll see about that, I told her. She had all the knowledge then of a grown person. She'd enter into conversation with men and women as clever and full of tricks as someone of 18. She twisted her father round her little fingers, and she'd have done the same with your mother had she lived. Spirit, you can't beat my lady, for spirit. She drove a 4-in-hand on her 14th birthday, and her cousin, Mr. Jack, got up on the box beside her and tried to take the reins from her hands. They fought it out together for 3 minutes, like a couple of wild cats, and the horses galloping to glory. She won, though. My lady won. She cracked her whip over his head and came down until he came, head over heels, cursing and laughing. They were a pair, I tell you, she and Mr. Jack. They sent him in the Navy, but he couldn't stand the discipline, and I don't blame him. He had too much spirit to obey orders, like my lady. I watched her, fascinated, horrified. A queer, ecstatic smile was on her lips, making her older than ever, making her skull's face vivid and real. No one got the better of her. Never, 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 she said. She did what she liked. She lived as she liked. She had the strength of a little lion, too. I remember at her 16 getting up on one of her father's horses. Big brute of an animal, too. That groom said it was too hot for her to ride, and she stuck it to him all right. I can see her now with her hair flying out behind her, slashing at him, drawing blood, digging the spurs into his side, and when she got off his back, he was trembling all over, full of froth and blood. That will teach him, won't it, Danny? She said, and walked off to wash her hands as cool as you please. And that's how she went at life. When she grew up, I saw her. I was with her. She cared for nothing and no one. And when she was beaten in the end, well, it wasn't by a man, it wasn't a woman. The sea got her. The sea was too strong for her. The sea got her in the end. She broke off, her mouth working strangely, dragging at the corners. She began to cry noisily, harshly, her mouth open and her eyes dry. Mrs. Danvers, I said. Mrs. Danvers? I stood before her helplessly, not knowing what to do. I mistrusted her no longer. I was afraid of her no more, but the sight of her sobbing there, dry-eyed, made me shudder and made me ill. Mrs. Danvers, you're not well. You ought to be in bed. Why don't you go to your room and rest? Why don't you go to bed? She turned on me fiercely. Leave me alone, can't you? She said. What to do with you if I show my grief? I'm not ashamed of it. I don't shut myself up in the room to cry. I don't walk up and down in my room like Mr. De Winter with the door locked on me. What do you mean? I said. Mr. De Winter doesn't do that. He did after she died, up and down in the library. I heard him. I watched him, too, through the keyhole more than once, backwards and forwards like an animal in a cage. I don't want to hear. I said, I don't want to know. And then you say you made him happy on his honeymoon? She said, made him happy? You, and young, ignorant girl young enough to be his daughter? What do you know about life? What do you know about men? You come here and think you can take Mrs. De Winter's place? You take my lady's place? Why, even the servants laughed at you when you came to Manderley. Even the little scullery maid you met in the back passage there on the first morning. I wonder what Mr. Winter thought of when he got you back here at Manderley after his precious honeymoon was over. I wonder what he thought when he saw you sitting at the dining room table for the first time. You'd better drop this, Mrs. Danvers, I said. You'd better go to your room. Go to my room, she mimicked. Go to my room. The mistress of the house thinks I had better go to my room. And after that, what then? You'll go running to Mr. De Winter and say, Mrs. Danvers has been unkind to me. Mrs. Danvers has been rude. You'll go running to him like you did before when Mr. Jack came to see me. I never told him, I said. That's a lie. Who else told him if you didn't? No one else was here. Frith and Robert were out, and none of the other servants knew. I made up my mind then I'd teach you a lesson, and let him too. Let him suffer, I say. What do I care? What's his suffering to me? Why shouldn't I see Mr. Jack here at Manderley? He's the only link I have now with Mrs. De Winter. I'll not have him here, he said. I'm warning you, it's the last time. He's not forgotten to be jealous, has he? I remembered crouching in the gallery when the library door was open. I remembered Maxim's voice raised in anger, using the words that Mrs. Danvers had just repeated. Jealous. Maxim, jealous. He was jealous while she lived, and now he's jealous when she's dead, said Mrs. Danvers. He forbids Mr. Jack the house now like he did then. That shows you he's not forgotten her, doesn't it? Of course he was jealous. So was I. So was everyone who knew her. She didn't care. She only laughed. I shall live as I please, Danny, she told me, and the whole world won't stop me. A man had only to look at her once and be mad about her. I've seen them here, staying in the house, men she'd meet up in London and bring for weekends. She would take them bathing from the boat. She would have a picnic supper at her cottage in the cove. They made love to her, of course. Who would not? She laughed, and she would come back and tell me what they had said and what they had done. She did not mind. It was like a game to her. A game. Who wouldn't be jealous? They were all jealous, all mad for her. Mr. De Winter, Mr. Jack, Mr. Crawley, everyone who knew her, everyone who came to Manderley. I don't want to know, I said. I don't want to know. Mrs. Danvers came close to me, and she put her face near to mine. It's no use, is it? She said. You'll never get the better of her. She's still mistress here, even if she is dead. She's the real Mrs. De Winter, not you. It's you that's the shadow and the ghost. It's you that's forgotten and not wanted and pushed aside. Well, why don't you leave Manderley to her? Why don't you go? I backed away from her towards the window, my old fear and horror rising in me again. She took my arm and held it like a vice. Why don't you go? She said. Where none of us want you. He doesn't want you. He never did. He can't forget her. He wants to be alone in the house again with her. It's you that ought to be lying there in the church crypt, not her. It's you who ought to be dead, not Mrs. De Winter. She pushed me toward the open window. I could see the terrace below me, gray and indistinct in the white wall of fog. Look down there. It's easy, isn't it? Why don't you jump? It wouldn't hurt, not to break your neck. It's quick, kind way. It's not like drowning. Why don't you try it? Why don't you go? The fog filled the open window, damp and clammy. It stung my eyes. It clung to my nostrils. I held on to the window sill with my hands. Don't be afraid, said Mrs. Danvers. I won't push you. I won't stand by you. You can jump of your own accord. What's the use of your staying here at Manderley? You're not happy. Mr. De Winter doesn't love you. There's not much for you to live for, is there? Why don't you jump now and have done with it? Then you won't be unhappy anymore. I could see the flower tubs in the terrace and the blue of the hydrangeas clumped and solid. The paved stones were smooth and gray. They were not jagged on the evening. It was the fog that made them look so far away. They were not far, really. The window was not so very high. Why don't you jump? Whispered Mrs. Danvers. Why don't you try? The fog came thicker than before, and the terrace was hidden from me. I could not see the flower tubs any more, nor the smooth paved stones. There was nothing but the white mist about me, smelling of seaweed, dank and chill. The only reality was the windowsill beneath my hands and the grip of Mrs. Danvers on my left arm. If I jumped, I should not see the stones rise up to meet me. The fog would hide them from me. The pain would be sharp and sudden, as she said. The fall would break my neck. It would not be slow, like drowning. It would soon be over. And Maxim did not love me. Max wanted to be alone again with Rebecca. Go on, whispered Mrs. Danvers. Go on. Don't be afraid. I shut my eyes. I was giddy from staring down at the terrace, and my fingers ached from holding the ledge. The mist entered my nostrils and lay upon my lips, rank and sour. It was stifling like a blanket, like an anesthetic. I was beginning to forget about being unhappy, about loving Maxim. I was beginning to forget about Rebecca. Soon I would not have to think about Rebecca any more. I relaxed my hands and sighed. The white mist and the silence that was part of it shattered suddenly, was rent in two by the explosion that shook the window where we stood. The glass shivered in its frame. I opened my eyes and stared at Mrs. Danvers. The burst was followed by another, and yet a third, and fourth. The sound of the explosion stung the air, and the birds rose unseen from the woods around the house and made an echo with their clamor. What is it? What's happening? I said stupidly. Mrs. Danvers relaxed her grip upon my arm. She stared out of the window into the fog. It's the rockets, she said. There must be a ship gone ashore there in the bay. We listened, staring at the white fog together, and then we heard the sound of footsteps running on the terrace beneath us. Oh my gosh. Oh, I can't believe I have to wait so many days until we figure out what happened. Is Maxim drowned? What happened? Why is Mrs. Danvers so terrible? Oh my gosh, that was a lot of information to bring in. There's a lot that just happened in those two chapters. My goodness, I'm so enthralled. I'm excited. I am nervous. So there you have it. Yes, Catherine says, tell us how you really feel, Mrs. Danvers. Right? Intense is a great word for it. Mrs. Danvers kind of finally cracked. And yeah. Oh, she needs to maybe go to therapy, see someone about some grief counseling, maybe. You were very welcome. Thank you for everyone who joined us. I can't wait to see you again next time. We will find out what's happening in the ocean and what the rockets are and what's going to happen. I mean, we know Rebecca doesn't die. I mean, the second Mrs. Danvers Winters doesn't die because she wrote the book. But who knows? It could be all a dream. Oh my goodness, so many things. All right, I will see all of you next time. I hope you have a fantastic day. And until then, happy reading. Bye.